Double lives, unfulfilled promises, and cultural alienation. Just a few of my traumatic experiences. Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are talking about immigrants and their kids by discussing Everything Everywhere All at Once. A film about a mother-daughter relationship so toxic that it ruptures the universe. Evelyn is a Chinese immigrant drowning in debt and denial. She is a true failure on every front. She came to America with her husband in hopes of starting a successful business. Decades later, her business is in shambles and her family is in disarray. Too old to die young and too young to die. Her life is so inherently meaningless that it serves as a blank slate for others to make something of themselves. Evelyn's story takes the typical immigrant narrative and turns it on its head. So usually we are focused on the first generation child, their journey, their experiences, coming to terms with the old and the new. And the parent is like a non-presence. They're this person in the background. They are, they're someone who will never change, can't change. They're very set in their ways. At best, they're like a catalyst for change, but there's really nothing else going on here. But this movie is different. We're following the parent of a first immigrant child and exploring their capacity to change. Evelyn is quite possibly the least stimulated, thought-provoked human being I have ever seen on screen. Unlike Neo, she enters a world that she was neither searching for or is worthy of in any way. Her inability to excel in anything has given her the potential to become anything. She has managed to let every opportunity literally slip her by. Consumed by everything, everywhere, all at once, Evelyn wakes up to a failing business, a failing marriage, a daughter she could do without, and an apartment full of bad memories. It's only at her lowest that she's able to entertain the thought that somewhere, somehow, it's got to get better than this. And it's this hope that allows her to believe that maybe if she tried putting her mind to something, she could possibly do it. And I thought it would be fun to use this film as a way of showing, it's never too late to dust yourself off and try again. And the film makes references to other TV shows, other works, but I'm sure someone will break those references down, but I am not that person. Instead, I want to discuss this film because, it gave me so much tea on my own reality. So the story is cyclical in that everything comes full circle at some point. And I think the point of that is to show that, in one lifetime, you can have multiple different experiences and live multiple different lives. So the way I've divided this video is according to birth, life, death, rebirth, and resurrection and second chances. The movie begins with a mirror image of a happy family, only to contrast this image with that of a family falling apart. This grim reality is where we meet Evelyn in death. So how did it all go so horribly wrong? Let's start with birth and Evelyn's origin story. So Evelyn is all our worst fears squeezed into one person. Her life begins in disappointment. A woman born into a culture that pedestalizes men. The only daughter of Chinese immigrants, she makes the decision to disobey her parents and move to America with the love of her life. Together, they start a laundromat and have a child. What was supposed to be their escape just ends up being their trap. And as time passes by, their once seemingly happy family becomes fractured. The first time we're introduced to Joy, she's just kind of staring, blankly into a load of laundry as it goes round and round in circles, preparing her for yet another pointless conversation with her mother. She's chasing her up and down this laundromat, getting her to listen, but Evelyn is like, get away from me, I don't want to hear anything you have to say. And so her daughter Joy is doing her best to salvage what's left of this mother-daughter relationship. Whereas on the flip side, her husband Wayman is done. He wants to serve her divorce papers and he wants to end the marriage. And this is where we meet Evelyn, on the cusp of financial and spiritual ruin. She's not living, she's surviving day to day. She's going through the motions. Every day she wakes up to maintain a business she hates, take care of a father that she deeply resents, a husband she tolerates, and a daughter that she just ignores. They are so fractured as a family that the distance between them creates a crack in the universe. And it's a crack which starts to reveal a light at the very, a possible light at the end of this tunnel. And it's at her worst that Evelyn is opened up to a world of possibilities, and her potential is directly connected to the people around her. The reason that she's not living her best life, the reason the people around her are not living their best life is because she's not living her best life. And instead of, I thought it was really clever that they didn't really introduce us to new characters. They just introduced us to better versions of the same people. And I think it's to show that we really are a reflection of the people around us. So in this multi-universe, we're reintroduced to Waymond, a much more confident version of her husband, and Jobu Tupaki, a successful version of her daughter Joy. So Jobu Tupaki, or Chewbacca, is what every immigrant parent dreams their first generation child will become: successful and fluent in their mother tongue. Jobu Tupaki is a great example of what doesn't kill you, makes you stronger, which in this case is her mother. So she was pushed to her limits by Evelyn, and as a result, she's become the most feared being in all the universe. Her gift is both a blessing and a curse, but she's unable to feel anything besides hate. Despite being the most powerful being in the universe, Jobu, like Joy, yearns for one thing and one thing only, which is to feel some type of love. And at face value, Jobu appears to not care what anybody else thinks, but this is a lie. And I think there's a lesson here, like as badly as we want our families to accept us, there's a certain point where you have to realize your life is your own. They've lived theirs, you have to live yours. And it's already hard enough for us to accept us as who we are. Like, why are we stressed out about trying to accept, getting other people to accept who we are? In Jobu's case, her ability to love herself is totally hindered by her mother. And so this desire to love and be loved just turns into hate, right? And in each universe, Jobu is a parent's worst nightmare. You know, her mother pushed her to become the best version of herself, you know, live up to her highest potential. And every parent is like that, right? They believe their child has endless potential, but Jobu, like, she reached that potential. And despite reaching this potential, her mother still has criticisms, right? She's like, why are you dressed that way? Who are you dating? What are you doing? You know, it's absurd. Jobu is able to experience everything that life has to offer, but remains unhappy, unsatisfied, and worse, pissed off, right? She's angry. And so she uses her gifts to go searching for the version of Evelyn that made her this way, in hopes that maybe a mother's love will save her from herself, which takes us to death and the multiverse. The use of this multiverse is unique because we get the same people over and over again. And in an immigrant context, this is to show that how deeply our self-worth is tied to the people around us, which, you know, specifically our families, right? The version of Evelyn we meet is in shambles. It's the worst possible scenario. Whereas the versions of her we meet in the multiverse are normal. Like, she could have become any one of those things. Instead, she became this, you know, like her very existence is a statistical impossibility. And, you know, being an immigrant, there's so much pressure, extraordinary. And when you're not extraordinary, or at least like somewhat successful, this is a disaster. And the reason for that is, you know, being an immigrant means justifying your existence, first to your family, and second to the larger community around you, right? Like, are you contributing to the economy? Do you have a career? You know, do you have a degree? And if you're unsuccessful and you didn't go to school, you know, and you didn't cure cancer, then it's like, why are you here? Who let you in? Like what are you talking about? You know, like, what's the point of you? And so people forget that being different is a privilege, right? Like, no one wants to stand out for having a name you can't pronounce. Like, that's just not fun. And as much as we try to turn our disadvantages into advantages, you know, there's still like a chip on our shoulders, right? Because you have to kind of make up for everything, right? Like, make up for your name, where you're from, you know, like who you are. And this pressure is just overwhelming sometimes. You're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So it's like, either you blend into the larger society or you blend into your community. Like, you got to blend into something, but not to blend into anything. And, you know, with immigrants especially, like, your default is different. So you're going to be more different? Like, what's the point of that? And that's why I enjoy Joy's character, because Joy is really interesting. Like, Evelyn's daughter, you know, with a lot of these immigrant narrative, like, the kid is super successful, right? Or they really made something of themselves, and now they're on this journey to find themselves. But Joy is something else. Like, by immigrant standards, she is a failure. By American standards, she's normal, right? She's finding herself, she's discovering herself. You know, she just wants to be who she is, you know, like, she's just chilling, you know, and she doesn't know why her mother can't accept her. And the thing I love about Joy is that she doesn't succumb to this pressure of living a double life. You know, like how she is around her mother is how she is around everyone else. And that is not something you see often. So Evelyn, I think, kind of resents her daughter for having that bravery, and it just makes her angry. Even when the adventure starts, Evelyn is in denial, right? She's given the chance to resurrect herself, but she remains adamant in staying exactly where she is. So the first time she's introduced to the multiverse, she complains about all the apps on her phone. The second time she's pulled away, she asks for tax advice. So she takes these baby steps to keep the possibility of this new world alive, but she never fully commits to it. So she understands that this is a chance to make her something of herself, but she's too afraid to try. And this is why she literally spends half the movie complaining and criticizing her husband. And in addition to this, I think it's really neat that you have to do a bunch of weird things or make something statistically impossible to verse jump, or like to access a new ability. The skills that you can access by verse jumping are skills that you already had the potential to gain, but you never really thought to pursue. And I do think most of us have the potential to do so much more than we realize, and this whole verse jumping thing kind of makes you rethink our limitations and why we're so quick to dismiss people when they give us a view or an opinion that we're not accustomed to. Like, I've noticed that with YouTube. Like, you might not know it, but I think most people actively go searching for opinions that articulate what's already in their head. Like, I had someone in my comment section talking about, oh, I disagree with your perspective and everything you have to say. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but a fact and an opinion are not the same thing. Like, you can appreciate someone's opinion and not get annoyed that it's not the same as yours. I was wondering why it took her so long to just kind of go along with it. You know, it takes her so long to be like, okay, this is really happening. And I think it's because we really can't think for ourselves, right? As much as we try to have our own thought process, we live in a very overstimulated society. And this overstimulation is to make it easier for us, you know, so that we don't have to think. And the problem with this overstimulation and all these things that we have accessible to us is that it totally cancels our ability to think outside the box. So in Evelyn's case, you know, her world is the laundromat. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. And she's not unusual in that way, in that most people they have their worlds and they don't like to deviate too far away from it. And I do think it's normal for people to pursue experiences or relationships that either validate what we're doing or kind of numb our existence. And when we are exposed to different types of people or different ways to live, we tend to shun it, right? Like, you see that with Evelyn. Oh, this is not for me. I have to do my taxes. I'm not good at this. And the reason we shun things that we don't understand is because no one wants to feel like they don't know what they're doing, right? And what's worse is, not only do you not want to feel like you don't know what you're doing, you don't want to feel like you're limiting yourselves. Like, I think we all want to believe we're doing the best we can in the situations that we're in, when in reality that might not be the case. And so at the start, Evelyn can't do it, right? She's just complaining and, you know, her mind isn't all everywhere. But as she starts to accept that these new worlds exist, she gets more comfortable, and she gets more comfortable taking these leaps of faith. And it's sad to say, but it might actually take this extreme to make something happen and make you more open or flexible, right? It took a multiverse for her to be like, okay, maybe there's another way to live, you know? And I know for myself, I do my best work when there's a gun to my head. Like, if you tell me I have to do something, I will do it. You know, suddenly anything is possible because I have no other choice. And it shouldn't get to that point, you know, where you have your back against the wall to see okay, I have to make a change. But that's what it takes sometimes. When Evelyn first sees Jobu, she assumes it's her daughter and she starts going in on her automatically. She's like, yeah, why are you dressed like that? Show some respect. Like, what are you even doing here? What are you ever talking about? And she's almost relieved that this Jobu exists because it explains why her daughter, you know, dropped out of school, gets tattoos, and dates who she dates. And this Jobu gives Evelyn some purpose, right? She wants to save her daughter from this evil being that lives inside her and makes her say disrespectful things to her all the time. So the first time she tries to fight Jobu, she accidentally verse jumps into a universe where she's living with a woman. And I thought that was a very clever way of saying that sometimes the worst fears are deepest desires, right? So poor Evelyn, she's struggling to verse jump. She's struggling to get the hang of this thing. And Jobu is just looking at her like, okay, yeah, so I'm just gonna introduce you to the bagel, the everything bagel. And this whole bagel thing was, hilarious. But besides being hilarious, Jobu created the bagel as an attempt to destroy herself. So in the bagel lies all her hopes and dreams and just a bunch of random Reddit threads. And I think it's normal for immigrant parents to want their children to succeed because they never really had the chance to succeed, right? At some point, when you're trying to survive, have to make the decision, right? Like I can't be great anymore. Like I gotta do what's best for my family. And when you move to a new country with a family, you have to put your goals and dreams aside. And you kind of hope like in sacrificing your goals and dreams, your kids will become successful. That's why like I think the children of immigrants, you already know, like, how many sacrifices we made to be here. Like they always remind you of these sacrifices, but they really were these massive sacrifices, which is why appearances matter so much. Like degrees, the way you look like, getting a respectable job, like it makes it all worth something. Like I remember when I first took off the headscarf, like I used to wear a headscarf and it got to the point where I was just wearing it to wear it. Like I didn't know why I was wearing it. So I told my dad, I'm like, I don't want to wear it anymore. And his thing was like, you don't have to believe in something to do it. Appearances do matter. And I think his logic is, as an immigrant, you need to figure yourself out. Either you're with a community or you're with the larger community. And so this pressure to either succeed or blend in is really strong because, again, you're starting at a disadvantage. So why are you gonna be more of a minority than you already are? Why wouldn't you just go with a group? There's strength in numbers. So I understand the logic, and Evelyn sort of like why she criticizes her daughter a lot, because that's how they're thinking. And so out of all the Evelyns that Jobu has encountered, this failure Evelyn, this Evelyn that's at rock bottom, is the Evelyn she believes. She can convince this Evelyn, okay, we're gonna jump into this black hole together. I think you might want to come with me. And I don't think Jobu is as over it as she acts, because if you want to die, you're just gonna die. You're not gonna go searching the universe to find somebody to die with. Like where's the sense of urgency here? So yes, she created the bagel to destroy herself, but she doesn't want to die alone. Why doesn't she want to die alone? Because she's afraid, right? She tells Evelyn straight up, I was looking for someone who could see what I see and feel what I feel. She's been stuck living this life for so long. Not only does she experience things, she experiences things at the same time. And she was hoping that if she found the right Evelyn, maybe this Evelyn could trigger her in a way that she's never been triggered before. And I think deep down, save her from wanting to destroy herself. And I think this is an interesting commentary on like experience and our addiction to experience. Like because we live in a very overstimulated society, we let the external world really tell us how to feel, right? Like it really controls our internal environment. And your ability to free your mind starts with the inside, right? Like you can move and you can travel the world and you can do all these things, and sure, it might help create that peace of mind, but it's never going to be enough, right? I think there's an addiction to experience now where people just want to experience as much as possible, do as much as possible, but it'll never be enough. I think peace of mind starts from cultivating your inner environment before you worry about the external. And a lot of the opportunities and the things that you're looking for are right under your nose, right? And sometimes we think, like we're searching for something, like the right experience will open our mind, or finally I'll see the meaning of life, but like you'll be searching forever. And so Jobu, she knows there's more, right? She knows there's things she's never felt, and she thinks, okay, maybe if I die with something else, I can feel a connection. And it's really sad to say, but that's just where we are in life. Like in order to connect with someone, we have to be on our deathbed. And it takes that extreme before we're like, listen, I need help, or it would have been nice to get to know you, right? Like it takes such extremes for people to pick up the phone or send that text and just take that leap of faith sometimes. So seeing Jobu gives Evelyn a sense of purpose, something she hasn't had ever, it seems. And so this triggers her rebirth, and she finally starts to come alive again. In order to save her daughter, Evelyn decides she has no choice but to become as strong as Jobu. And this is what makes her, this is what frees her mind. And I really do believe we're at our best when we're fighting for something like greater than ourselves, because you see that with Evelyn, right? At first, she's not doing much. She's not really accessing her powers. She's just not really getting it. And the minute she has to save her daughter, she's like, okay, yep, I can access these powers. I get it now. No need for explanation. But little does she know the thing that her daughter needs saving from is her. And at one point, she's trying to explain the multiverse to her family. And she pulls her daughter aside and she says, listen, I know why you feel what you feel. I know why you're stressed out. I know why you're screaming for help. It's because of the demon that lives inside you. And she's just like, oh, you don't get it. I think people can be a double-edged sword in this way. Like, of course, you want to be self-motivated. It would have been nice if Evelyn could just channel her powers for her. Instead, she doesn't. And I think in an immigrant context, you know, it's two extremes, right? You have this pressure to survive, but also to be an individual. And some people can do it. Some people can find a way to pursue careers or start businesses that feed their families, but also allow them to be content with themselves. But for a lot of families, that's not the case, right? They kind of go into the survival mode where they're doing everything they think is the most secure thing they need to do in order to make money and, you know, secure their family's future. And as a result, this kind of mentality gets passed down to their kids. And now these kids have the survival mentality where, you know, they pursue careers and, you know, relationships that aren't really good for them, but keep them in a comfortable place. And this is something I've had to actively fight myself, where I'm like, okay, everything I know is wrong. You know, like this kind of survival thing where, you know, if you don't have all, you know, the external figured out, like job, house, career, you're a failure. And so you really have to untrain your mind. And so the pressure that parents feel, like immigrants feel when they first move, like there's so much uncertainty in being an immigrant, and they kind of pass this uncertainty on to their kids, and then we feel the pressure. Maybe I'm projecting, but that's just how I feel. And as immigrants, we spend, especially first generation immigrants, I know for myself, like I spent so much time hiding. And you know, you have these double identities, like who you are around one group isn't the same as who you are around another group. So Evelyn can't really accept her daughter because her father can't accept her. So she attributes everything she doesn't like about her daughter to this Jobu, realizing it's the same person. And I think parents and families, like this pressure, you know, it has the power to turn you either into a monster or into this kind of like soulless, lying being. Important message, because you can't hide forever, right? It's exhausting. Like at some point you have to make the decision to just say, there's nothing I can do. So thankfully, just on a side note, like Joy and Evelyn, you know, they're able to meet in the middle, but that's not always true, right? So if your family can't accept you for you, then it's not really on you to convince them. And actually, people don't have to really accept you for you, right? I think the best thing you can do for yourself is be who you are in plain sight. And I think any hope of your family or whoever you want accepting you kind of goes away if you're lying, you know, and if you're hiding. And if you're just kind of doing this double life thing. It takes all this for Evelyn to learn, like, damn, like the only person who can accept me is me. And, you know, she's got to let go. You know, she's got to let go of her family disappointment, the pressure, you know, all these things that she put on herself in order to, like, you know, salvage her relationship with her daughter and her husband, which takes us to the last cycle of life, which is resurrection and second chances. So out of all the Evelyns that we see, you know, there's Chef Evelyn, there's so many Evelyns, but the best Evelyn is the movie star Evelyn. You know, in this universe, Evelyn is living her best life, and so is her husband Wayman. And the further apart they are, the more successful they are. And I don't know who said money can't buy happiness. Like whoever said that was poor, because, you know, you're looking at two of them, and especially when you really love someone, you think, how could they survive without me? And the answer is they would survive not only just fine, but probably better off without you. And sadly, you know, with success comes sacrifice, and the sacrifice in this context is her daughter Joy. And so in this universe, Evelyn tells Wayman, you know, she kind of comes to the realization like, oh my God, where's Joy? Where's my daughter? And, you know, she's literally in a movie theater watching her life play out. And it was really funny that like the worst Evelyn was a movie. Like she was watching herself live her worst life. Like that's how bad her life was, that like it's stranger than fiction. Like it's like something to laugh at, because it's like You know, that's the thing about Evelyn. Like, it wouldn't be as bad. Like, she's a failure in an immigrant context, right? It's like you have a laundromat and it's not successful. You didn't do much with it, and now it's the stuff of movies. So she kind of reaches a breaking point and has a conversation with Waymond. She's like, "Where's our daughter?" And she kind of informs him, like, "Listen, if we ended up together, we would have been poor with a failing laundromat business." Literal breaking point in Evelyn's life, because she finally comes to the realization that she's about to lose her family forever. Because everything that Evelyn has feared, it's kind of like coming up right now, right? And the question is, why can't she let Joy go? So out of all the universes, this is the universe where Joy doesn't exist. And she's had this burden her whole life. You know, her family let her go. You know, she wasn't close to them. And so this is something that's always bothered her. And in an immigrant context, like, family is very important. Like, your success is measured by how well you're able to keep your family together. And so that's why she's unable to let Joy go. Like, does she agree with how Joy is living? No. Does she like her very much? No. But she's her daughter. You know, she keeps her close to her because, you know, her family let her go. So the idea that not only is Joy no longer with her, that she never existed, is just not something that she can comprehend. So in this universe, Waymond is like, "Listen, like, we can't be together." And he kind of explains why, right? He's like, "Okay, you know, maybe you were the love of my life, but, you know, sometimes it is what it is." He kind of says, "Listen, I've always been scared and confused." And, you know, initially, Evelyn and her family, you know, they made him feel like his kindness was a weakness. But over time, he kind of learned to use his kindness as an advantage and survive. Not everything has always made sense to him, and even and especially when things didn't make sense, he coped with this uncertainty by remaining kind and loving, because after all, you can't fight fire with fire. And despite being brokenhearted, he still would have loved the chance to live a life simply doing laundry and taxes with her. And when he said that, I died. You know, like, imagine someone saying that to you. Like, I would have been perfectly content being broke but doing laundry with you. And, you know, sometimes, like, perspective is everything, right? Here's Waymond, he's successful, but he's still like, you know, I still would have been happy. And I think what Evelyn comes to realize is that her unhappiness has nothing to do with her failing laundromat business or her husband or her joy, but it has to do with herself. It took this extreme for her to, like, change her perspective. And it's only then that she starts to think, okay, what if? Not what if in terms of like, oh man, the best has passed me by, but what if, like, the best is yet to come? And so instead of just letting another opportunity pass her by, she takes, you know, she moves forward and she takes charge of her own life and let this pressure break her, right? So again, Evelyn is on the cusp of financial and spiritual ruin. And I think she was betting on the fact that they're family, that they're going to stay together. But that's not the case, right? Like, everybody in her life is about to walk away from her. And instead of being destroyed, she finds a way to survive and she fights back, right? She doesn't just let things passively happen to her. The reason everyone is walking away from Evelyn is because there's nothing worse than feeling unlovable, right? Like, hurt people really do hurt. You know, her husband feels hurt, her daughter feels hurt. The tax lady was mean to everyone because her husband divorced her. You know, Evelyn was mean to everyone because of her dad. And, you know, throughout her journey, Evelyn has found the courage to, like, fight back. You know, she's become so powerful that she's, like, very confident that she can destroy everyone. Like, she's kind of become Jobu in that way. But just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. It's really hard to be kind. You know, it's much easier to be mean and rude to people because you don't actually have to see them as people, right? Like, you can see them as incompetent, lazy, not good at their jobs. You know, and sometimes we criticize people for things that we don't even care about. You know, it's like, why do we care that our coworkers are incompetent when we don't really even care about our jobs? And everyone has a story. And the way this movie, like, illustrates this is really wonderful, because at one point she's fighting back with love. And I didn't notice this until, I think, a second viewing. But all the people attacking Evelyn, like, they're all wearing different clothes. Like, some are soldiers, some are wearing normal clothes, some are wearing suits. But when the world is coming at you, they're all the same, right? So you don't really make a distinction between people. But once we start getting glimpses into each person's life, you know, you kind of see they all have desires and they all have troubles and they all have demons that they're struggling with. And I think the lesson there is, like, even in the thick of it, there's always something to love. regardless of how bad or how silly the situation might be. So the more powerful Evelyn becomes, the more confident she becomes, not just in saving her daughter Joy, but letting go of all these like responsibilities. And I think once Evelyn stopped taking no for an answer, she got the second chance, right? She stopped letting things just kind of happen to her. And, you know, she kind of lets go of the resentment because, you know, I think there's a myth that like time heals all, but it doesn't. You know, like that's why it's really dangerous to, you know, that's why I say like you have to be who you are openly, because eventually it's going to explode. Like you might think you're calming a situation down, but you're just like postponing the inevitable. And that's what happens with Evelyn, right? She explodes. Like all these things were bottled up. They were there, they were sitting there. And she hoped like over time it might go away, but it just doesn't. And during the final scene, she explodes and, you know, she hits a literal rock bottom. She signs the divorce paper. She starts, you know, destroying the laundromat. She gets arrested. All her bills, all her taxes and problems, they just get sucked into the bagel. And finally, everything that she's been setting aside and ignoring has her full attention. And the absurdity of her reality, you know, it hits her so hard that she becomes a rock, a literal rock. And this whole rock scene, you know, was wonderful because even as a rock, she still has joy. And this whole rock thing was so cute because I guess, I'm sure there are other universes out there, and I'm sure they're all just like blank slates. You know, like I don't think every universe out there is like, that has people on it. So, you know, in this conversation, Joy notes that like every day they're discovering new things. Every new discovery makes them realize they don't know things. You know, like they kind of just realize like how small they really are. And I think sometimes we can be so self-centered. Like the world doesn't revolve around us, right? Like there's a bigger picture here. And, you know, if the more we know, the less we realize. The more we know, the more we kind of realize like we don't actually know anything, which is why you just like might as well just do what you want and be who you are anyways, because, you know, like there's no point. You know, let people sort themselves out. Which brings us to Evelyn's moment of truth, this you know, confrontation with her father. This confrontation, like as a first generation immigrant, I can't imagine my parents confronting their parents. Like that's crazy to me. Like that's like, whoa, that's a bridge too far. Like can their hearts take it? You know, like it's just a lot. And, you know, Evelyn is an interesting character because she's an immigrant with a first generation immigrant child. And I think this idea of like holding in everything so you don't disappoint your family is very true to life because, you know, I think there's a certain point where, as I said earlier, like time heals all. Like, okay, let's just say you fear that the person you are, like your parents might not accept you. Okay, so what do? You get a job, you get a degree, like you live that external life. You know, like that's what a lot of these movies are about. Like you see the immigrant child and, you know, they live these wonderful lives in an effort that this will be enough to get their families to accept who they are. But all that does is make you look worse, right? So the longer you lie for, the longer you hold things in, the worse things become, right? You kind of break the trust instead of build the trust. So Evelyn confronts her father straight up. She says, how did you let me go so easily, right? She just doesn't understand it. Like she has a daughter now. She doesn't like her very much, but she's still not going to let her go. And I think in defense of Evelyn's father, I think he thought in letting his daughter go, he was like setting her free. You know, like I think he thought, okay, this is her decision. I'm going to let her go. But he never contacted her again, right? The only time she saw her father after she left is when he got sick. And this is an important commentary because you can change your environment. Like I'm someone, I cannot live close to my family, but your environment, like you cannot free your mind, right? Like your environment might help, but if you're not free in the mind, nothing matters, right? So Evelyn traveled halfway across the world, and her success, her ability to be happy around her family, her ability to find happiness with the people around her, like she's still stuck in China, right? She's still thinking, oh my God, like where's my father? Like why isn't he calling me? And so she lives in a prison in her own mind, and as a result, everyone is at a prison with her. And so she tells her father, you know what, I'm done. It's okay if you're not proud of me, but I'm proud of myself. And her dad's reaction, like watching him towards the end of the movie just be comfortable with Becky, like I thought it was really interesting because again, I see Evelyn as someone who is a typical immigrant parent, like ain't no way she's gonna change. And then her dad, that's like a non-presence. But again, even he was like looking at her like, damn, like I thought I was setting you free. So again, this whole time he thought they were successful. Maybe he didn't, but he's in shock, right? In his mind, his daughter left to pursue love, and he probably thinks she forgot about them when it was both ways. Top of telling her father, like, listen, I don't care what you think anymore. She grabs her daughter and she says, okay, this is, your granddaughter is just as bad, if not potentially worse than me. She's aimless, she has no goals, she's stubborn, but she's worthy of love, And whatever she's lacking is made up for by the fact that she found someone as kind and patient as Wayman. And just like that, all her fears, all her anxieties went out the window and into the bagel. And so Evelyn not only stands up, I think it's standing up to her father. She was like standing up for herself. So now that Evelyn has come to a decision, Joy has to make a decision. And Evelyn, I have to say, like she has failed on every front as a mother. It was really spectacular to watch. And at the end of the movie, she learns that the only way she can show up for the people in her life is to show up for herself first. And this idea of self-love is very controversial, right? This is a new age thing. So if you're taking care of yourself first, you're selfish, right? Like you don't care about your family, you don't care about anyone but you. And I don't know why that is, like if you're not happy, how are you supposed to make someone else happy? Like this kind of survival mentality is like, okay, I have to sacrifice my happiness to make you happy. And you sacrificing your happiness is making me more unhappy. So this is a very deeply like rooted belief, like this self-love thing, this is not something you talk about, right? Like everything you do is for someone else. And if you want to do something for yourself, well, you're selfish and you need to sort yourself out. And Joy is just shocked. She's just looking at her mom, she's looking at her grandfather. She's walking away, but she's not really walking away. She's kind of reeling, right? She never thought her mother would defend her like this. Because her mother, from what she's seen, like she doesn't want to hear the truth. She's never been too interested in what she has to say. And so she's shook, right? Joy doesn't know what to do. And, the only thing the multiverse did in terms of Evelyn is show her like, it doesn't have to be this way, but she still is who she is. So Evelyn, shout out to the immigrant parents who will always tell you the truth. Like, I don't know about you guys, but your parents will tell you if you're gaining weight, if you're aimless, like they'll tell you straight up. And that's what Evelyn says to her daughter. She said, listen, you're gaining weight. I don't like how you dress. To be quite honest, I don't even really like your company. And there's more you could be doing in life. But despite your failures in this external culture and this world, you will never fail as my daughter. And that's kind of what she says to her. She says, listen, you're still my daughter. I love you. You could definitely do more. And, you can't really argue with that. And and Joy is just like, excuse me, and I think that's what she wanted, right? And again, like Joy's ability to kind of free her mind is really just hindered by her opinion of her mother. And so, this was a beautiful ending because in kind of loving themselves, they're able to love each other more. And so the movie ends with Evelyn whole, everybody's at the table, everybody has a seat at the table. And I love that. In the beginning, it was just Evelyn sitting alone, and now it's everybody at the table. They're all helping with the taxes. They're still in debt, they're still in chaos, but everyone is on the same page. And that's how the movie ends. And so I think the lesson here is, you have to be who you are openly. And, sometimes we think we're doing people a favor by hiding who we are because we don't want to disappoint them. Like, of course you want to live up to expectations, but having a child, I feel like, is having like a Kinder surprise. Like, you don't know what you're going to get. And especially in an immigrant context, like family is very important. Like your family, for them to let you go fully is really just like unheard of. And if they let you go, they probably think they're doing you a favor. So I think it's important, like the message of this movie isn't, like family's everything and we're all kumbaya and we're all this and that. Like, I don't think it's that. I think it's just, you can't lie about who you are. You know, you have to put yourself first in order to, you know, be happy, in order to make the people around you happy, right? Evelyn has had a chip on her shoulder for as long as she can remember. And this chip, you know, has destroyed her family. You know, they're unhappy, trying to make her happy, and they don't know why she's unhappy. And so, yeah, that's the lesson here. And that goes for everyone. You know, like, this was a nice ending, but that's not true for everyone. You know, and I think the faster you are in being comfortable with who you are out in the open, you know, the easier it will be for people to come around and accept you. And if they don't accept you, it is what it is. You know, again, people don't owe you acceptance, but you owe yourself, you know, you are your biggest cheerleader. And so it was a beautiful movie. You know, I love that we were following the parents. Like, this is something unheard of. Kind of makes me think of my own parents. Like, damn, you really are a person with, like, thoughts and opinions. You know, like, sometimes we just kind of put people in a box because we think they're putting us in a box, and then we end up recreating a cycle of nonsense, right? So yeah, you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.